question. When it comes to the subject of mental health, is the issue around access in terms of one, you need to have money to go see someone when you have mental health issues, or is that not the case, Mpho?
Okay, I think this goes both ways now. So the first one, I'd say that yes, in terms of access, when we look at the structure of South Africa and how it is, the only people that are able to actually access quality mental health services are people that live in suburbs, are people that live in more posh areas or more good-looking areas. Whereas if you look at like the more of the like disadvantaged places, there isn't much access into mental health in those spaces. And if there is access to mental health, then it's not services of quality that are delivered to those people. So there are services in a way they are limited. And then, can you please repeat the other parts of the question so that I can remember? My mind is working overtime.
No, I think you kind of answered it, but it's just mostly to understand access of mental health. Is it an issue around money, or is it other barriers that, in your view?
Also, I think it's just a matter of education. You know, as Nokuthula said, the fact that people aren't really educated when it comes to mental health, especially Black people. Black people still think that mental health is a white man's disease and it's never a Black person's disease. Hence, it's easier for Black people to take anything that's related with mental health and put it backwards, and then focus on other things that they deem to be more important than their actual mental health. So when the breakdowns and the mental breakdowns, the emotional breakdowns happen, that's when people only pay attention to mental health and the impact that mental health can have on your overall function.
Okay, now I think that's perfectly kind of gives illustration around one, not necessarily just limited to money, but also an issue around education around the topic of mental health. So I think that's very well contextualized, and I think we're going to delve a bit into that as well. Chido, on your side, and this is another, not necessarily a question, but a statement, and maybe you can just demystify if it's wrong or, you know, prove if it's right. And I'm trying to phrase this in a way because the way the person asked is a bit very blurry, but the question or the statement is, avoidance is not always bad. And he basically left it at that. So his context is distraction is not always a bad thing when you have a challenge of mental health. What's your view on that?
Okay, in the way that I understand the question, I think distraction, if you're saying, you know, distract yourself away from focusing on the issue, perhaps now you are feeling down, you think you might have depression, and then you want to distract yourself, or maybe you've had trauma and you're like, okay, let me focus on something else, let me focus on work. I don't think that is a good thing. So when you say it's not always bad, you shouldn't distract yourself from dealing with issues. If you're starting to see your mood is going down or you're feeling overly anxious, it's something that you need to look into and see, do I need help? Am I coping? I think there are some types of distraction. That's not really a distraction, but it's more of, I wouldn't call it a coping mechanism, but things that we do to increase our mental health and wellness. So if you say, you know, I know that I'm struggling, I'm having a depressive episode at the moment, I'm using depression as an example, I'm going to start running, I'm going to take up running. You're not distracting yourself, but you're bringing in activities that increase serotonin, which is the happy hormone in the blood, and you are not focused completely to be like, oh my goodness, this is me, and I'm stuck here, and. So I sort of agree, but to say distraction, I wouldn't say like distraction is bad. But if you are dealing with things, but you also just don't completely focus on your mental health issue, but also, you know, you're interacting with friends and you join a book club or you start running, that is a good kind of distraction, quote unquote. I just don't have a better word for it, but just activities that help you become more well-rounded and yeah. I'll stop there. I can talk a lot, so I'll stop there.
No, I think we'll have ample time for you to kind of give a context around some of the topics we're going to cover. And I guess lastly, Sindiswa, I guess on your part, and maybe this is to lead into the actual conversation. the difference in your view between, and this is someone asked this, so maybe obviously it's not maybe a lack of knowledge, who knows? So education is a thing, I guess. Mental illness versus mental health. Is that one thing or is it a different thing from your perspective?
In my perspective, mental illness is actually what you go through during the dysfunction. In terms of spectrum, if we to say, mental illness is when your mental health is not well taken care of. Then you might be prone to having a mental illness, such as depression, such as anxiety. Those are all illnesses that are caused by a dysfunction of sorts, right? So mental health is a practice, right? So you practice mental health daily. So that is talking about your emotions, being self-aware of how you feel, being able to communicate and set boundaries. Now that is mental health. Being able to practice it is very different from being ill. I don't know if I answered that. It's not the same.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, and I think there is some variation around the two, and maybe some interlink of how the two relate to each other, but there are differences, as you mentioned. So I think
yes,
some of these, a couple of other questions, but I think we'll just reserve them for either later or some other discussion. Now, to get the conversation rolling, and I want to start, because obviously sometimes you kind of detach yourself from the conversation, and I want to bring it back to you, bring it home, as the terms goes. We're human beings and we all go through experiences. And maybe to start with Nokuthula, on your side, and what has been your journey in terms of, one, obviously psychology being something that obviously you are in the space, almost in the industrial side, but in context to that, mental health linking to what you do for a living. And I ask this question in the context that, for example, I'm in the financial space, if you want to call it that, or financial institution, or FSP, so forth. But people, obviously, relative to their jobs and their professions, experience different challenges, but most so your journey into your profession, and relative to that, what impact has your mental health been impacted by that? If you can just switch on your mic.
I need 3 hours for this answer. I'm just joking. I want to start with the positives. I always say this, I am so fortunate to be in a field in a field of study where I am able to help people, or where I would be able to help people and at the same time help myself. Because as I'm going through my studies, I'm learning a lot more about myself, and I'm learning a lot more on how to improve my own mental health. I have not had the best mental health journey, and my studies has helped me to put titles to what I'm experiencing, and it also helped me with understanding how to deal with what I'm going through. So I had lots of mental health issues I think it started in 2018, because I had a very unhealthy relationship with my academics. So I had what I would title as the overachiever syndrome. And for me, I didn't live a very balanced lifestyle. So I was all studies. Now you see, the brain is like a car. And that's why I read something recently that said, to assist with the stigma around mental health, we should probably rephrase it and say it's brain health. Because, and I'm going back to, the brain is like a car. When you drive your car, you fill up your car with petrol, and then you drive it. And then you drive without fueling it. It's obviously going to run out of petrol, and then it's gonna die. That's how the brain is. And that's what I have experienced along my journey, along the way, in terms of my academics. And my studies helped me or my field of study helped me to sort of deal with it when I reached complete burnout. So in 2018, I started experiencing intense anxiety symptoms. And at that point, I was this person who only wanted to achieve, and I was only focused on my academics. I only wanted to study, didn't do anything else, I didn't attend any social events. I was only in front of my laptop the whole time. So I didn't live a very balanced lifestyle, and it affected my mental health. And it was only last year where I actually understood, okay, Nokuthula, this is what went wrong. This is what went wrong. This is what you could have done, because only then I had the understanding of the importance of psychological well-being, which is the optimal functioning of the individual. You need to live a balanced lifestyle. You need to have a social life. You need to have your academics. You need to ensure that you are financially well. Like, there are different aspects of well-being that needs to be taken care of for you to be functioning optimally. Otherwise, you will experience what I have experienced, burnout. I reached complete burnout last year. Luckily, my studies helped me. As I said, I was educated enough to know that, okay, I'm burned out now. Don't have depression. I'm not in the position to diagnose myself with depression. That's why I don't like it when people loosely use the word depression, because you have symptoms of depression, and that's it. So I was in the position to identify my symptoms of burnout, and I knew that when I got to the doctor, they were gonna refer me to a psychologist. And yes, they did, and I was keen and I was open to go for therapy, because I understood the importance thereof, and I understood what I experienced. And she explained to me, in 2018, you experienced this, and this is what caused it. So I knew it. And I was open to therapy. So hence I said in the beginning, it's all education. If I was educated enough in 2018 to know that, Nokuthula, you need to live a balanced lifestyle. You can't just use your brain. You need to fuel your brain. Then I would have made better decisions at that point. But I wasn't educated enough to do so. So I reached complete burnout. And that's how my studies helped me to accept where I am, understand what I need to do going forward, and now I'm implementing these things. And I always say I want to advocate to high schools, not high school students, to primary school learners. I think the foundation needs to start there. We need to start educating there on the importance of living a balanced lifestyle for optimal functioning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope I wasn't too long. Yeah, I can talk.
I guess maybe it's a thing in the profession where I guess usually people obviously open up to you maybe, and people try to express themselves, but maybe you have a lot also to share. But maybe this is the platform where you can open up and you can share your thoughts and all that. But obviously be cognizant of time. Mpho, I guess maybe relative to the question I asked Nokuthula, on your part, what has been your journey into you being obviously in the clinical side as well, and relative to mental health? And there was one point that Nokuthula mentioned around, obviously, on an individual from a studying and point of view, but on your individual capacity, maybe outside of work, how does mental health, because sometimes also you can't speak about it like from the negative aspect, but also what has been the highlights of the positive things relative to, your career and your journey into your profession?
I think one thing for me when it comes to the positive sides of mental health, from a professional standpoint, for me, I think it has to be improvement in terms of your mental health as an individual, because most people think that whenever a patient or a client comes to see you, the what can I say, the work happens for the client only. But in actual fact, it happens that you as the therapist, while you are in the session, while you are busy providing therapy and psychology, you are actually getting healed within the process, and you are improving as well within the process. Because there's no therapist that wakes up and they are a good therapist. It's a journey, it's a learning journey. And I think the more you see improvement in your patients, the more you as a therapist as well, you get to actually go the extra mile for your patients, and you actually get to, it positively affects you. Because when we look at mental health and when we look at ourselves as therapists, in all honesty, therapy and counseling, they are emotionally taxing and they are mentally taxing. So knowing that what I'm putting out to another person is having a positive effect on them and it is improving their daily functioning and their lifestyle, it makes you have a positive outlook on the work that you do as a therapist. So I think for me on a professional level, that is what keeps me going in terms of mental health. But then also on a personal level, I think self-care is very, very important, especially when it comes to myself. I really value self-care a lot because when you look at most of the patients that come into your office, you would actually be able to pinpoint from the introductory session that this person, the reason why they feel the way that they feel, it's because they lack within self-care, you know? So the point of all of this is to go back to self-care and make sure that you take care of yourself as an individual. You do things that can help you get to a point whereby you can actually say that you are mentally healthy. So for me, self-care is very, very big, and I'm very big on encouraging self-care to other people so that they can also get to a point whereby they actually see themselves as valuable people that can add positively to society.
Perfect. I think that's it's self-care is very important, and sometimes as a guy, sometimes self-care is seen as it's not our thing. You just inherently just find things to do, and it just becomes your self-care routine, if you call it that. But I think just identifying things that speak to that and prioritizing that and putting emphasis to it and is very important as for all people. Chido, and I think just to extend to what the conversation has been flowing to, you're obviously a medical doctor, and some of the questions I even had one from someone who's obviously leading towards becoming a doctor in relatives to one, your profession, but also you obviously being a mother in this case as well. How do you balance one, your career, and two, obviously, also typically in the medical field, I believe, now I stand to be correct, is that it's very time consuming in terms of the amount of time that you have to kind of dedicate into growing your career in the medical space. But also one, obviously now you have your personal life that you also have to manage. How has that been for you in that journey or in that context?
The journey has been so sucky. I'm still figuring it out. That's the truth. I'm still figuring it out. I've been doing it. My oldest son is 7 now, and I'm still figuring it out because you do. And I think probably similar to everyone on this panel, the path we've chosen in terms of career, it's this. Usually you're a high achiever. You're a person who wants to do the best and be the top and what. So you have to put in certain hours. It's been difficult. So what I do sometimes, like say now I'm on call, I'm gone for like a day and a half. They don't see me. I don't, drop them off in the morning like the other moms. They've become used to it, but they struggle as well. So when I'm home, I try to be completely present. I try to be phone away. And so like now today I made an exception, but usually I don't do things after. Like if I've knocked off, I'm home and I'm mum. Otherwise you start to lose that connection and the kids will, my younger one is very expressive. And just the other day he was crying and he said to me, Mum, you don't spend enough time with me. And this is a 5-year-old who I'm glad he's able to identify his feelings and say them and trust that I'll be able to do something about it, but it makes me sad. So I'm figuring it out. One day at a time. So there's a lot of guilt there. You're a mom, but in the workplace, you're a Black woman. So you have to work twice as hard as everybody else for people to, tip their hat to you and say, okay, well, she's doing well. So it's a journey. And you feel guilty, you feel sad a little bit to be like, these people, do they have a mom? Is this what moms do? The mom who cooks like twice a week, is that what moms do? But I'm figuring it out, and hopefully it'll work out. I won't like damage them and then they'll need like therapy later.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I really appreciate that. I hope if your son ever sees this podcast episode, he's not going to recognize this is the people that took away time between mom and son. But yeah,
not at all.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Sindiswa, I guess to the flow of the conversation, I think we'll cover a few other points as well for the sake of time. What has been your journey, and relatively so as well, how do you manage the aspect of your personal life relative to your career as well? Yeah.
For me, especially what Mpho says, I resonate with that a lot, because you actually do learn how to take better care of yourself in session with the client. Because personally, like, I feel it's important for me to be truthful, and to be genuine with my clients, because I cannot say you must do something that I myself have never done. So most of the techniques and most of the therapy sessions and activities I give my clients, I try by all means to practice them myself. So one of them that has really helped me, because I am a poet, I'm a writer, but you would be surprised how sometimes I cannot identify how I feel at all. There's no connection with my feelings. So there's a activity I like doing with my clients that every day after work, you just switch off and you just ask yourself genuinely how you feel. And you just find one word or two words and you write them down. And then you identify why you feel that way. And then you identify what did you do with that feeling. Just that activity alone has really helped me maintain my mental health, because then it also helps you set boundaries. Because if today I felt frustrated and then at the end of the day, I identify why I felt frustrated, then tomorrow I'll be able to say, okay, I'm feeling like this again. What can I change now so that later on in the day, I feel good about myself? So that level of emotional awareness for me as a practice has been important, because when you are in session with a client, and especially clients that have trauma, severe trauma, they pull you in their cloud, because it happens. I'm human and I have emotions and whatnot. So it's very easy to get sucked in their world and yourself feel like you're going through that. So it's very important in our profession to regulate and learn how to come out of there and just become a rat.
Perfect.
So that's what I think.
Yeah. And like you said, applying what, it's not a case where you separate yourself from your clients, and being able to actually see the practicality of what you're telling them can work, or those kind of dynamics. So I really appreciate that. I think that's very important advice. Now, some questions that obviously speak to the podcast, to the discussion. And I think maybe I'll start the same sequence. Nokuthula, you can probably just answer as short as possible. Is one, when it comes to mental health, and obviously it's a very tough conversation for people to have, especially in the Black family. And, what is your kind of views around how we can navigate conversations around mental health? And maybe this is where I kind of bring my own personal experience as well. So obviously being the last born, and I come from a very quote unquote patriarchal, the father doesn't express himself. Is the guy goes to work, comes home, expects food to be cooked for him. And growing up, my father and our conversations were, how's school? How are your grades? Did you do this? Did you do your chores? And here and there, obviously, you have conversations. If you're quiet, is everything okay? And particularly, and this is probably a conversation that we'll probably also have, probably leading to the end. Sometimes, obviously, say, "Don't go pray about it." And obviously, I'm spiritual and from how I grew up. But sometimes the conversation never speaks to actual speaking about how you're feeling. And what is your view around mental health relative to the family dynamics? Nokuthula.
Sure, that is a deep one, because it is so unfortunate that we know enough. Like we know, we see, we read, we hear, but it's difficult to impose that, or to inform our parents. So, but what we can do is start with the smaller ones. Like that's where we can have control. With the adults, we need to have mild conversations. Dad, this is how I'm feeling. And this is possibly what is leading to this. This is the environment that you're creating. So it's that mild conversations that you can have, but we need to invest more in our younger generation, our kids. That's where we have 90% control. Like, I wouldn't want to say complete control, but like that's where we have control. And just have mild conversations with your dad. You sent me to school. I always have these conversations, man. Like, you sent me to school. This is the education that I'm getting. This is what they say. I show proof, I present states. This is how South Africa is looking. This is how I'm feeling. This could possibly be why I'm feeling this way. So it's just that having conversations and different type of conversations with different types of generations.
Perfect. I think Mpho is going to join us back. I think she just had network issues. So I guess I'll go to Chido just to rotate back to her. And you've obviously heard the question I asked Nokuthula around, obviously, the Black family dynamics that speak to mental health. And this is now the point around vulnerability. And I was having this kind of thought, I was obviously thinking about what kind of questions to obviously gauge into with this conversation around. Is vulnerability sometimes a bad thing in a way? Sometimes it can also be, depending on who you're expressing your challenges or your mental health issues with. Like, do you have to be selective, and what kind of criteria or is it a case of only speak to professionals? And if you got mental health issues, I can't go to my parents, I can't go to if I have a girlfriend, I can't go to her. How do you navigate that about who you speak to, who you be vulnerable to? Chido.
It's tricky, hey? Because you do, vulnerability is important, but you have to be selective, because some people don't have the tools that might be required. Most people don't have the tools. I mean, look in the Black family dynamic, raising boys. And I'm experiencing this now in 2022. If my son falls and hurts himself and he's crying, you'll see people walking past. Why are you crying? Boys don't cry. That's teaching them that you must keep these things. You don't, express emotions, and it's little things like that. So we have to learn that it's okay to be open, and it's okay to say, look, guys, I'm struggling. I think with the parents, I would want my children to be able to come and speak to me. I might not have all the tools because I'm not a qualified therapist or somebody, but I can support in some way. I don't think, though, that you should speak to whoever will listen, because being vulnerable is like taking off your clothes and standing on a mountaintop. So are people going to laugh at you and be like, ooh, look at this one? Or they're going to be like, okay, this is what they're feeling. I don't have the answers, but I can get you help. So you need to be able to discern that. And sometimes it's difficult. But hopefully, yeah, if in doubt, I think speak to a professional, because some people can say some stuff that's damaging, or that'll, throw a person off completely. Like, for example, suicidal thoughts. If you think, I'm thinking of hurting myself, a person's response to that can either like take you off the ledge or push you over. So, yeah.
Very true. And I guess now leads to another question for the sake of time. And I think Mpho and Nokuthula will probably join us back. Sindiswa, there was a question that I obviously was asked to ask, and this is relative to, and maybe this is a question I hope everyone was able to hear, but I was still probably laid back to everyone else as well, is there's an aspect whereby obviously you being a person someone comes to when they have some challenges or they want to speak about, mental health or their experiences, any thoughts that they have, to be vocal to you about them. Do you find that, because in African context, there's obviously priests, the elders, there's so many dynamics of people who hold responsibility. Do you think there's a disconnect between people coming to your services versus those relying on obviously religious institutions, traditional healers, even social media, even if you want to edit that? What's your view on that?
My view on that, I've always said, Peter, that especially churches and especially traditional healers, anyone that sits with another person and talks into their life, I feel, for one, they must be very well equipped and trained to deal with issues that might arise. Because you find that sometimes people are facing anxiety or depression, or having an episode of depression, right? And then now they go see they go see a traditional healer. And then because they are ill-equipped to deal with the matter that is being presented to them, they then channel them into paths whereby they might have not necessarily had to go to. So I feel it's very important for them to be well equipped, not really deeply, not really go for the whole degree, but understand the different problems that people have and be able to identify them. And it's so great to see churches like pastors and all being equipped and learning about emotional intelligence and learning how to spot trauma and all of that, and hiring counselors in the church, because we are all tasked to help someone that comes to you asking for help. And I feel that churches, because if they don't come to me, they're going to go to church, they're going to go to traditional healers, and we all should be equipped to be able to help. Know when, okay, this is not a spiritual issue, this is a clinical issue. Let me refer this person to a psychologist. Okay, this is not a spiritual issue. Let me call a social worker. They must know when to engage us and know how to help people that come to them. So I really feel that it is because we can't, especially our profession, there are few of us, hence there's so many titles. So you find a community like mine, there's like one psychologist and like 3 counselors having to serve a whole society and community. Some are going to fall through the cracks, but if a church can get to them or a traditional healer can get to them, then they can refer them and send them out or help them themselves.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And it's very important because one of the things that I was obviously doing research is there's also issue around the availability of resources. So considering the dynamics of the pandemic of mental health in our society, the amount of people available to assist people, there's an issue around that. And whether the question is, are those people also well equipped to provide their services within these communities if there's already not enough people available to provide these kind of services which are within. And I guess I'll go to Nokuthula after this, but let me start with Chido, then I guess Mpho will hopefully join us just before we wrap it up for the sake of time. Chido, obviously you're in the medical space and there's a conversation around obviously the physical health of people. And one, obviously, if considering issues around HIV being a big issue, it's not necessarily a big issue within the society because obviously the stigma is obviously reducing. And one of that, obviously, with the stigma such as that of a disease, for people to be vulnerable, but also relative to that link of mental health in, there's a stigma of something out there. And because you have that, whether it's an illness or whatever it be, the ability to obviously be able to be vocalized around, obviously, I'm sick or I'm not feeling well. How do you experience that as a doctor? Do people, is it a case of, hey, yes, I'm just sick and help me out? When it comes to your patients, if I can call them that, is it a case of people are able to vocalize? And as a doctor, what is your if you're to from hindsight or speaking from the outside, speaking in, what kind of tips would you say for someone to come to you and say, hey, look, I'm not feeling well physically and relative to that, my mental health as well?
Thanks, Peter. That's such a loaded question because I think there still is a lot of stigma, just like with HIV, with mental health, because it's all like, oh, this one is crazy. Oh, this one. That's what people, they might not say it to you, but that's how people feel. And so you'll find a lot of the time patients they won't come. A certain demographic will, and I must say it's more of the white patients and or more a certain demographic amongst the Black population, but the majority won't. They'll come with, oh, my tummy's sore, and oh, I'm tired, and oh, my back is sore, like non-specific symptoms. And if, as I've learned, as I've gained experience over the past 12 years or so, I know how to pick it up now. And I'll be like, oh, okay, we can definitely sort that out. But so how are things at home? And if you delve into that, usually like within the next 5 minutes, you're getting tears because the person is not well. They just don't know how to tell you that it's not here, but it's here. So I think education, like in Nokuthula and Sindiswa also, and Mpho mentioned, education is so important for us to remove the stigma. It's just your brain chemistry. You spoke about brain health, Nokuthula. It's your brain chemistry that's off. It's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. Just like a diabetic, there's nothing wrong with them. Their sugars just don't balance because they don't have insulin. So it's not you. Your hormones are just not balanced. We can fix it. I think, yeah, so it's a lot of education that's needed in terms of being allowing the patients to be able to speak up and say, I'm anxious, I'm sad, I'm burnt out, I'm having PTSD symptoms. Yeah. And then the second part of your question, I've forgotten because I've spoken so much now, but I think, yeah, that's my response.
No, that's perfect. I think we'll come back into any other context around that question just before we wrap it up for the sake of time. Nokuthula, then we'll go to Mpho. Nokuthula, obviously you had the conversation so far around one in relation to patients, the context around vulnerability. And maybe to jump into this particular area of mental health and in this current generation of the young professionals, and also those who are still in the educational space in terms of being students, is social media. And I want to hear what's your take on the impact of social media. Is it a case of, hey, that app just deleted, or is it a case of, people have to restrict? And maybe I'm over-explaining to try guide the question, but what is your simple view on the issue of social media? Is it a concern? Should I be blocking people? Should I be checking out what's trending? What's your take, Nokuthula?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It goes back to my first view, balance, and not overusing it, because even with your phone, like using your phone for too much, besides what is on your phone, just the light, having the phone in your hand, you are using parts of your brain. It's gonna deplete. So it's gonna deplete your brain. So it's about balance. Social media can be there, yeah. It has its, what do you call this? It has, we have this comparison, we are in this comparison trap where we compare ourselves to people. So it has its pressures, but we should start balancing our time in such a way that we don't spend too much time on social media. Not on social media, on your phone in general. Like we also used to having, we are in the Zoom meeting, but I'm also checking out my WhatsApp. So now you're dividing your brain and you using it here and there. But after this, you don't understand, and then after this, you don't understand why you're tired. Because you are multitasking. So it's a matter of, we need to learn how to balance our time and plan our things in such a way that you don't spend too much time on social media. I mean, if you dedicate 2 hours or 1 hour to social media from between 8 and 12 or between 8 and 10, let me be realistic, then you're not gonna have lots of time to see Mihlali or whoever's, let me not call names, or you're not going to feel pressurized by whoever's live is coming up next, because you've only dedicated this amount of time on social media. And also, you've only dedicated this amount of time on social media. And also it's a thing of control. So it's control and balance. You control what you view on social media. You control what you see on social media. There's a series called, I don't want to dive into it too long because of time. There's a series on social media. I'm not sure what's it called, where it shows how people or the algorithms control what you see on social media. So next thing you view XYZ, for example, and then they bring things up that relates to that. And next thing you on your phone for 2 hours, where you would have been on your phone for 30 minutes if you had controlled and balanced your time. So it's control and balance. Social media can be there. It depends on the individual.
Perfect. And the way I have so many questions around different topics, and apologies if I'm trying to go through different areas and you're not speaking to the same topics altogether, but obviously you have the opportunity, if you want to chip in here and there, interject if you want. because one of the other relative questions to social media, which is its own topic, was obviously I was having a conversation around, social media and mental health. And the point that was referred to me is that sometimes, for example, he uses TikTok a lot and says, sometimes it just increases my dopamine, and what's the other word you used? I can't remember. It's a chemical, that it just brings you joy. You just, you want to laugh because maybe you're going through a lot in life. And because of that, social media becomes that kind of, I don't want to say escapism, but it gives you that kind of grace of not dealing directly with it. And maybe that speaks to the earlier question around, distractions, but that's its own question. Mpho, obviously, I see you raised your hand. So yeah, you can obviously add on if you want to mention something. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much. I wanted to add on to what Nokuthula was saying, to say that, with social media now, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that social media on its own is a form of addiction. People can get addicted to social media. And with that addiction, it comes with a lot. It comes with sleeping disorders. It comes with increased suicidal thoughts and actions. And what other thing that makes people go towards more of the suicide route is the fact that people don't monitor what they have access to on social media. So if people actually were able to limit what they have access to, it would actually be able to help them to stay less on social media. Because with most patients that I've seen who have problems with social media, it happens that with these patients, it increases their anxiety. They see things such as COVID-19 killing people. They see things such as unemployment. They see a lot of things that are related with GBV, and that thing, it increases their anxieties, and people end up having things such as anxiety disorders or even depression, because what they are currently going through or what they are currently seeing about